There were mini clusters, little, sets of three. Three were dismembered, three were in oil drums, some were in water, some were on land. It's like my own little nightmare scenario.
He was one of the most prolific serial killers whose name you may not even know. He killed up to at least 17 women. Holy nightmare on a stick! What the is wrong with this man? Bug-eyed piece of nightmare fuel son of a... What the... Anyway, hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Joel Rifkin. Viewer discretion, well, too late, is advised. Joel David Rifkin was born on January 20th, 1959. His birth parents were college students who just weren't ready for a child, and so a few weeks into his life, Joel was given up for adoption, and he was fairly quickly adopted. So his new parents were Bernard and Jean Rifkin, and then they would, I think a couple of years after him, they would adopt another child, a girl. So Joel did have a sibling growing up. By the time he hit kindergarten, they already pretty much discovered that Joel had some learning disabilities, and this really affected his ability to learn, even at a very, very young age. He was also kind of an awkward kid growing up. I mean, he sort of... I guess had like the dorkier look, kind of nerdier kid, scrawny, wasn't very athletic, and so throughout school, to go along with his learning disabilities, he was picked on a lot. He was at the bad end of bullying for several years in school because kids are awful. But back at home, Joel had a very good life. I mean, his adoptive parents were very good. His dad was a very successful person. He made a lot of money. They were definitely able to provide for the kids. Joel's dad did everything he could to, kind of bond with him. At one point, he tried, teaching him how to throw and catch with footballs and baseballs, but Joel just never caught on, and he couldn't catch and he couldn't throw. And his dad eventually just sort of like, all right, well, maybe sports isn't for you, but that's okay. But he had a good relationship with his sister. He had a good relationship with his parents. But as he got older, as the bullying got worse, as his learning disabilities were causing issues at school, he eventually kind of grew away, and he became a little more standoffish with his family, a little more combative, I guess you can say. By high school, Joel tried his best to fit in. He tried joining like the track team just so he could be like a sports person in school, so people wouldn't pick on him as much, but it just didn't go well for him. He eventually became a member of the yearbook team where he would take photos, and he was known as a really good photographer. People said he had a knack for it, really talented, and it actually just gained him a little bit of respect at school. Not a lot, but some people were a little less mean to him. Apparently, his parents had absolutely no idea he was being bullied. He kept it pretty secret. I can relate. Fast forwarding a little bit to 1987 in February, Joel's father, his adopted father, he had been battling cancer for some time, and eventually it was too much for him, and so he took a bunch of pills and he ended his own life. And this kind of messed with Joel a little bit. Joel would kind of revert back a little bit to his, standoffishness. And he took to movies, and one particular movie he watched was, I guess, Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy. And from there, Joel became fascinated with the idea of strangling prostitutes, strangling women. And it became like a sexual gratification type thing. It's something he wanted to do. In late August of 1987, he would actually get involved with, I guess, a prostitution ring, and he was busted by police during an undercover sting, and he would go to jail for a little bit. But by 1989, he was out and about, and he started his own landscaping company. He would just do landscaping around the area. Which, by the way, this is in like the Long Island, New York. It's kind of, this sort of happens in New Jersey a little bit. So it's in that neck of the woods. In 1989, he would meet a woman named Heidi Susie Balk. She was a 25-year-old, I believe, a sex worker. And he brought her back to the house that he lived in, I believe with his mother. And one thing led to another, and he would enact on his urges of strangling a woman, strangling a sex worker. And he strangled, she would go by Susie. He strangled Susie until she was dead. He then just kind of calmly dismembered her body, put her in several bags, and he dispersed her body just in various places in New York. Not too long afterwards, there would be people who would be searching in the kind of New York, New Jersey area, and they discovered Susie's head in a bag. And I don't know if they found her entire body, but they found other parts. And so obviously a murder investigation began, but they didn't really know exactly who she was, and they couldn't really retrace her steps, which means they really couldn't find out who she was with. And therefore, Joel basically kind of saw this unfolding and realized, oh, I'm getting away with this because they're not going to catch me. They're not going to have any idea I even met this woman. And that gave him, that emboldened him. That gave him more courage to keep doing it, to do it again. So let's fast forward to June 28th, 1993. On Long Island Southern State Parkway, Joel Rifkin is driving his pickup truck. Well, it's not so much driving as he's fleeing. He is fleeing from cops because he had crashed his truck, I guess, into a pole, did some pretty serious damage. And when cops showed up, he decided to say, oh, and he sped away from it. And so the cops were chasing him for some time before eventually the truck just crapped out. And so the cops, kind of, walked up to him with guns, like, at the ready. And he just sort of put his hands up like this. And they asked him who he was. He said, I'm Joel Rifkin. And one of the officers just kind of smelt something a little strange, bad strange. And it was coming from the back of his truck. Police then lifted the back door, and they noticed this big blue tarp. And they lifted the tarp up, and there was this garbage bag underneath it, but there was also hair coming out from it. And so they kind of opened up the trash bag, and it was a dead body. The body would eventually be identified as 22-year-old Tiffany Bresciani. Tiffany Bresciani was his final victim. Susie was his first, back in 1989. But were there more? There were a lot more. So police arrested him that night, obviously, for the murder. They discovered that he was literally on his way to get rid of this particular body. He had admitted that he killed her 4 days prior, on June 24th. She was also a sex worker that he just picked up, had sex with, and then he killed her, strangled her, and then was going to just hide her body somewhere. He had been using his landscaping business as like a way to, I guess, hide bodies somehow. Well, that night of the arrest, as they're questioning him, he just basically says, yeah, there's 17 victims. He says, I've killed 17 women. And he says it with no emotion, no remorse, really just, yeah, no, I just did it. I killed a bunch of women. So on June 9th, 1994, Joel Rifkin would go on trial for the murder of Tiffany Bresciani, as well as endangering the lives of 2 police officers. And he was convicted of that murder and those crimes. So for that one in particular, he got 25 years to life. The 17 victims that he claimed he killed were 25-year-old Heidi Susie Balk, Julie Blackbird, whose body has never been found, 31-year-old Barbara Jacobs. Her body would eventually be found in the Hudson River in 1991. 22-year-old Mary Ellen DeLuca. Her body was found in 1991 in Cornwall, New York. 31-year-old Yun Lee. Her body was found in September of 1991. in the East River off Randall Islands. There was one victim he just identified as number 6. He didn't even know her name. She's never been identified, and she's also never been found. 28-year-old Lorraine Orvieto. She was found in Coney Island Creek in July of 1992. 39-year-old Mary Ann Holloman, also found in Coney Island Creek in July of 1992. Then there was a victim he called number 9. Did not know her name either. She was found in May of 1992 in a steel drum, and that was near Brooklyn, floating in Newton Creek. Unfortunately, police have never been able to identify her. Then there was 25-year-old Iris Sanchez, was found in June of 1993, and that was near JFK Airport. 33-year-old Anna Lopez, she was found in Patterson, New York, and that was in May of 1992. 21-year-old Violet O'Neill, she had been dismembered, and parts of her body were found in July of 1992 in 3 different locations. 31-year-old Mary Catherine Williams, she was found in December of 1992 in Yorktown, New York. 23-year-old Jenny Soto, she was found near the Harlem River in November of 1992. 28-year-old Leah Evans, she was found in Northampton, New York, and that was in May of 1993. 28-year-old Lauren Marquez, she was found in June of 1993 in the Long Island Central Pine Barrens. And then finally you have Tiffany Bresciani, who was found in the back of his truck when he was pulled over. He confessed to these 17 women. There is a chance there could be more. Police, they did search his home after he was arrested, and they found several pieces of jewelry. I mean, a bunch of jewelry items that did not belong to his mom or his sister. And a lot of these jewelry items were confirmed by the family members' victims of belonging to, their loved one that was killed. They also found the driver's license of a few women. They found women's underwear that did not belong to his mother or his sister. They were found in his room. They also found bras. They found just lingerie items in his house. His house was a mess. In particular, his room and his garage, it was just like a pigsty. There was just shit everywhere. Crap just thrown all over the place. Not literal crap. You know what I mean? Stuff. He really didn't take much effort in cleaning up, the items he had stolen off of these women. And he kept them as trophies, which is what a lot of serial killers do. He wanted them as mementos. He wanted to look at them and remember what he did because he's a psychopath. And that's what insane serial killers do. He would be asked in a later interview, did you ever feel for these women? And he said, when you're doing things like this, you don't think of people as people. You think of these people as just as things. He said these women he thought of as just things. He said, when you're doing this, he goes, well, at least for me, you don't think about them having family members. You don't think about them having friends and coworkers and loved ones. You don't think of that. He says he basically convinced himself that these women didn't have anyone in their lives because it made it easier for him. I guess in a way for people to maybe feel for him a little bit, but obviously that's not going to work. I mean, he said he chose sex workers in particular because no one would really report them. No one would miss them. But that ultimately wasn't true because these women all did have families, and maybe not all of them were noticed missing, but a lot of them did have families that realized they were missing. And, so it didn't really account for that. He was asked, why did you do it? And he said, I don't know. He said, I don't know why I did the things I did. He can say why he killed specific women. He said he got the urge to kill some of them because they ridiculed him during sex, or he was unable to satisfy them, and so they got upset with him. And so he decided in the moment to murder these women because of those things. People later on would say that they were amazed at his lack of self-awareness, his lack of remorse, his lack of sympathy, his lack of any emotion at all. He just seemed to be kind of this robot who just did these things and felt that it was okay to do. In total, Joel Rifkin would go on trial for 9 total women. They were not able, there were obviously women whose bodies they couldn't find. There were women that they couldn't exactly link to Joel, but the majority of them, they had a case against him, and so he would be convicted on 9 additional counts of murder next to the Tiffany Bresciani one, so 10 in total, really. And he was sentenced to 203 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole when he is 238 years old. I hope he has a good skin cream to look good at that age, because you're going to look a little rough. Look a little rough around there. There was a time, actually, believe it or not, where they suspected that Joel Rifkin may have also been Lisk, the Long Island serial killer, also known as the Gilgo Beach killer, who was recently apprehended. When he was interviewed, the Long Island serial killer hadn't been caught yet. He was interviewed years and years ago. And they asked him, like, do you think the Long Island serial killer is going to keep going? And he goes, yeah. He noticed that there was like a pattern in that the guy would dispose of bodies in like 3s or 4s. And he said, that's what I did. I would dispose bodies 3 at a time. Because we like patterns. We're all about patterns.
There were mini clusters, little, sets of 3. 3 were dismembered, 3 were in oil drums. Some were in water, some were on land. It's like my own little nightmare scenario.
It's creepy and weird, but, he almost like idolized this Long Island serial killer that no one knew who it was back then. But the dude's a trip. The dude's an absolute trip. He is a nightmare of a person. Joel Rifkin currently enjoys his days at the Clinton Correctional Facility, and that's located in New York. So he will die there. He will never, ever see the light of day again. And good riddance to Joel Rifkin. Hopefully in some way his 17 victims are resting in peace, and that their families have found a way to move on. One set of brothers would be murdered by another set of brothers, in a story where just hanging out in the woods leads to something bad. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Gitche Manitou State Park murders. Viewer discretion is advised. Gitche Manitou is technically a state preserve, I guess. Mainly a wildlife reserve. It's not so much considered like a public park, but it would be frequently used as a park, and people would go there to camp. People would go there to just sort of hang out, kind of in a desolate place to, smoke some weed, drink, kids being kids, teens being teens. It's located in Lyon County, Iowa. It's just like right past the border of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And this will be the location of one of the most famous mass murders in the history of Iowa. Stuart and Dana Beatty were 2 of 5 total siblings. The 2 of them were really close brothers. Dana was the youngest sibling of all of them. Stuart Beatty was born on June 6, 1955 in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Growing up, he was described as a super laid-back young man, very chill, very calm demeanor. He had a lot of friends. He was someone who was just a super sociable kid. He also had this blue van that he absolutely loved. It was like his prized possession next to like his guitars, because he loved playing guitar. And he would take any opportunity he could to drive this van around. So anytime anyone needed a ride, a friend needed a ride, family, he'd be like, I'll do it. His youngest brother, Dana Beatty, was born on July 28th, 1959, also in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Dana Beatty absolutely adored his older brother Stuart. They were two very, very close brothers. Around the time that this unfortunate case happens, Stuart is actually teaching his brother Dana how to play guitar. Dana now has his own guitar and he loves practicing it, he loves playing, and he is a very quick learner, and he thinks that his brother is just like the best teacher in the world. Any opportunity he had to hang out with Stuart, he would take it. The Beattys were friends with many kids in the area. One of them was 15-year-old Michael Hadrith. He would go by Mike to everyone. I can relate. I hate being called Michael. Mike was born on October 16th, 1958. He was actually born originally in Chippewa County, Minnesota. Mike was someone who was considered to be very, very close with his family. One of his sisters was like his absolute best friend. They adored being around each other, and everyone said Mike had this great big heart. He was just a super loving guy who would make sure that anyone was doing okay, and if they weren't doing okay, he would do anything to make them feel better. Another one of the Beatty's friends was 17-year-old Roger Essam. Roger Essam was born on May 31st, 1956 in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Of this group of friends, he seemed to be the one with the biggest personality, the most, I guess, the loudest one of all of them. He was arguably just the most fun person to be around. He loved to just have fun and make sure everything wasn't being taken just so seriously all the time. He was described as someone who always seemed to be in just a really good mood. He usually had a smile across his face, and he knew how to, make a gathering or a party really feel festive and really feel alive. It was the morning of November 18th, 1973. A young couple was driving across the South Dakota-Iowa border, and they were going into the Gitche-Manitou State Reserve. As they're driving, they see something that kind of sticks out to them, something just doesn't look right. It's unusual. At first, it looks like they're just mannequins thrown onto the ground, just sort of chilling there. So they get out of their car, they approach what they thought was mannequins or just something trash or whatever. And when they get closer, they realize these are not mannequins. These are people, and these are deceased people. There was 3 of them kind of lined up in a row, and they all appear to have blood just kind of pooling underneath their bodies. Just at first glance, it looked like they had been shot. And by the way they were positioned, it looks almost like execution style. So they get in their car, because this is before cell phones. They go to the nearest place that they can reach an actual police officer, and they get police out to the Gitche-Manitou State Reserve. And the police confirm that the bodies were kind of in this fields, in a very open field, and there was this pathway where it almost looked like, if they looked at the gravel road, I guess, it looked like these bodies had been dragged down this road and sort of veered off to the right of this path, and that's where the bodies were just kind of put. As they are searching the area, they notice another body far away from these 3 bodies. It's just one individual now, also who appeared to be shot to death. All 4 victims looked to be very, very young. I mean, these were teenagers. Around each body, they did find casings, shotgun shell casings, and they would determine that they were 12 gauge, 16 gauge, and 20 gauge. So they easily figured out that there were 3 different weapons used. So which would mean possibly 3 different killers had fired a shotgun, killing these 4 young men. The boys were quickly identified. 18-year-old Stuart Beatty, 14-year-old Dana Beatty, 15-year-old Mike Hadrith. Those are the 3 that were found together. And then the individual who was found separately down the path was 17-year-old Roger Essam. The families were notified right away, and this is when police learned that Stuart drove this blue van, but when police were at the scene searching it, There was no sign of a blue van. Nothing at all. There was actually no vehicles there. So they didn't even know how the boys got there, but then they found out that they must have gotten there in Stewart's blue van, because they did see some tire tracks there to indicate that there was a vehicle there, recently. But they couldn't find the van, so they're searching everywhere. They're looking all over the place, around the state reserve, the city surrounding it. They're looking into the Iowa border, the South Dakota border, in the neighborhoods these kids lived in. Can't find the van anywhere. And there really wasn't much physical evidence left behind. There weren't anything that they could get fingerprints from. There were only the shell casings, which didn't have fingerprints on them when they're being loaded into the shotguns. There was no DNA found that didn't belong to the 4 victims, but this is also 1973, where DNA wasn't really a thing. There wasn't any foreign hair samples found. There was nothing. They found what looked like a little campsite with a guitar resting against a tree, and they determined that was Stuart Beatty's guitar. So the police kind of figured that these 4 boys had probably gone there to hang out, play guitar, just like a lot of teenagers did in that area. But nothing was found on the guitar. Nothing was found at this little campsite that would indicate who may have done this horrible act. And they were just at a loss. They had nothing. And then, about 20 hours after the murders likely took place, a young girl walks into the Sioux Falls Police Department. This girl is 13-year-old Sandra Chesky. Sandra Chesky was one of 4 siblings. She had 3 older brothers. She was the youngest of the group. Sandra, just like the other 4 boys, was extremely well behaved. She never got into any kind of trouble. The 4 boys who were found literally never got in any kind of trouble. All of them got good grades. They were all considered very well behaved. Sandra came from a really, really good background, really loving and supporting family. She had actually met 17-year-old Roger Essam about a month prior to this happening. She was 13, he was 17, but the two of them became very close very fast and essentially became boyfriend and girlfriend. Sandra would say that it was basically love at first sight for both of them. So what does she tell police? Because they don't know what she has to do with any of this, even though she was, the girlfriend of one of the victims. Well, she tells a story. It was the evening of November 17th, 1973, so the night before the bodies are found. Roger Essam calls his girlfriend Sandra and says, "Hey, I'm going to be hanging out with Stuart and Mike and Stuart's little brother, Dana. We're going to go just hang out at Gitchy Manitou. We're going to play guitar, hang out. I brought a joint so we can smoke." And he asked, "Hey, do you want to come along?" And she's like, "Yeah, of course, I want to come along." She wanted basically anything and everything to do with Roger. She wanted to be around him because she loved him that much. So basically, all 5 of these teenagers now, they meet up, they get into Stuart's blue van, and sometime around 10 p.m., 10:30 p.m. is when they actually get to Gitchy Manitou Park. Sandra says when they arrived, it was just them. There was no other vehicles parked. There was no sign of anyone else there at all. Sandra described it as just a really calm and fun evening. And they built a little fire. Stuart got out his guitar. He started playing it. They were just laughing, passing the joint around. And they were just having a good time. It was, as Sandra described it, the perfect night until it wasn't. Roughly 30 to 40 minutes into this very calm and relaxing evening, the 5 teenagers started to hear the sounds of branches cracking in the nearby woods. It sounded like someone was walking across, fallen down branches, and they were making just some sort of very subtle sounds. Roger Essam begins to call out, "Hey, who's there? Come out, what's going on?" But no one comes out. So Roger gets up and he kind of walks towards where the noise is happening. And then the other 4 teenagers who are still at the campfire, they hear a loud gunshot. The 4 of them get up, they're like, "What the hell just happened?" And that's when 3 men come out of the woods, each one of them holding a shotgun. Mike Hadrith begins to like argue, like, who are you guys? And he like puts his hand up, and one of the guys shoots the shotgun and shoots Mike through his hand. These three guys basically come out and say, listen, we're with the DEA, we're with the police or whatever. We see you guys have a joint, and so we're here to bust you. None of them were wearing any official like police clothing. They were all in just normal clothes. But these were kids, especially Sandra. She was only 13, very naive. They didn't really know. And so at first, they were kind of believing them. So these three men basically point the shotguns at all of these other 4 teenagers, because now Roger is down. They don't even know what happened to him. And they march the 4 teens back to Stewart's van. And they basically say, listen, we're here to bust you. You're under arrest, blah, blah, blah. One of these 3 individuals is being referred to as the boss. And when they get to the van, the 4 teenagers also see a pickup truck. And this is when the boss tells Sandra, the 13-year-old girl, to get into the truck. And he does so at gunpoint. And so she gets in, he then gets in, and he just takes off. This guy just basically just kidnaps Sandra. In the truck, he keeps telling her, he keeps trying to reassure her that, she's going to be fine. They're going to be fine. They weren't real shotgun shells. The guns were all loaded with tranquilizers. And so that's why the other guy went down right away, because the tranquilizer took effect. We missed your other friend. We shot him in the hand. Oops. Again, she's 13, naive. She's believing this, kind of. But as this boss person is driving away in the truck, Sandra turns around and she sees, because she was told her 3 friends were going to be loaded into the van and taken somewhere. But what she sees actually is 2 of these men holding shotguns up to her 3 friends and walking them away from the van. And that would be the last time she would ever see them alive again. Sandra and the boss are driving around this area just sort of aimlessly for what she thinks is hours, until they eventually get to what looks like an abandoned farmhouse. When they pull up to this farmhouse, that's when Sandra notices Stewart's blue van, and there are some people standing outside of it. But when they get really close, they notice that it's actually the other 2 men who were the assailants back at Gitche Manitou. She doesn't see her friends anywhere. So the boss gets out of the truck. He approaches his 2 friends. And one of the 3 men is like this sort of heavier set guy with like this little mustache. And he's like kind of talking to the boss. And they're like pointing towards the truck and at Sandra. So the heavier set guy walks towards the truck. He gets in the truck, and he wastes no time. He just sexually assaults the 13-year-old girl right then, right there in the truck. Then when he's done, he gets out. The boss gets back into the truck and basically looks at this hysterical young girl now who has just gone through so much trauma and said, if you tell anyone what happened here tonight, I'm going to kill you. We're going to kill you. And he asks her where she lives. And so they drive to her house, and unbelievably, he lets her out of the truck and lets her go back into her house, where he tells her one more time, remember, if you say anything, I will kill you. So, she, within 20 hours of all of this happening, she finally works up the courage to let her parents know what happened. They take her to the Sioux Falls Police Department, and that's when she relays this entire story. So now they have something to go with. They have an eyewitness to the murders of these 4 boys they had found earlier. She got a good look at all 3 of these individuals, and so they were able to make some composite drawings of all 3 of them. Kind of creepy looking, as most composite drawings tend to be. But she was able to describe them with pretty good detail. She also described the truck as being something like a Chevrolet truck, as best as she could tell. Within a couple of days of the murders happening, within 1 or 2 days, they found Stewart's blue van just parked in a random parking lot. And they forensically analyzed this truck like crazy. They dusted it for fingerprints, checked for anything and everything they could find, but there was nothing in it. No signs of anyone other than Stewart and his friends. There was no indication of anyone else. No fingerprints, hair samples, nothing left behind, nothing. For the next almost 2 weeks, on a daily basis, Sandra gets into a police vehicle with any one of the detectives working on this case because they want to see if they can find the farmhouse that she was brought to. So they get this grid set up. They take a map and they grid it off, and they like search each grid box every day. And it's like a several miles by several mile grid search for each one. And for the first 11 days, they find nothing. She doesn't recognize the barn anywhere. But it's finally on the 12th day, just shortly after Thanksgiving, is when they are driving, and she goes, "Oh my God, that's the farmhouse." And she says with an absolute certainty, "This is where they brought me. This is where they sexually assaulted me." So they pull up next to it. It's definitely abandoned. No one had lived in this farmhouse for a very long time. So they all get out of the vehicle to search, and as they're getting out of the police vehicle, a Chevrolet pickup drives up to the farmhouse. Sandra immediately grabs onto one of the deputies, bear hugs him, and points at the truck and says, "That's him. That's the boss. That's the guy. That's the boss. Get him." And so the guy in the truck sees what's happening, and he backs up, and then one of the deputies gets into the police vehicle and chases him down and manages to get him to stop. And so they get him out of the vehicle, and the individual turns out to be a man by the name of Alan Fryer. The Fryers were a very, very large family there on the border of South Dakota and Iowa. There were obviously the parents, but then there were 7 boys and 6 girls. Super big family. They were well known in the community. Half of the kids were really well behaved and seemed to be pretty normal, but there were a chunk of them that definitely were not well behaved and were troublemakers. The family owned a massive portion of land, and on that land they had their own little house, and their father was very, very strict. He constantly scolded the kids. Specifically, 3 of the boys he seemed to kind of really hone in on in terms of like really beating them down mentally. He didn't even refer to these 3 sons of his as his sons. He referred to them as the chore boys. Alan Fryer was one of the older siblings. He was the loudest of them, meaning he had like the biggest personality of all of them. He wasn't afraid of much. He was someone who would just constantly tell tall tales. He would lie about everything. He would over-embellish things to people. And he absolutely loved his shotgun. Loved it like it was his own child. David Fryer was younger, and he seemed to be always just a super dreary person. Had a very like comatose or somber kind of mood always. He was someone they said just sulked around all the time. Just like, woe is me. He was also a follower. He became Alan's like little minion, like his little puppet. He would do anything Alan told him to do. James Fryer was the more violent of the 3 brothers, of this particular 3 brothers. He was always angry, just like constantly in a state of anger. Always just mad at everyone, hated everyone, it seemed like. He was the one who kind of first started getting into trouble with the law. He would steal cars. He would like commit minor assaults. Like he was just always getting in trouble. But his behavior began to rub off on on Alan and David especially. And the trio, they began to kind of commit crimes together, stealing and assaulting. And they one time shot someone with a rifle. They didn't die, and they really didn't get in much trouble for it either. But when these 3 brothers were together, they were a problem. They were always a problem. So police asked Alan, "Hey, where were you the other night?" And at first he's denying everything, like, "I had nothing to do with those murders. I don't know who this girl is." Sandra, she was confident. This was him. This was the boss. This was the guy who drove me around in the truck. I know it. That's the truck. I brought you to the farmhouse where he ended up driving to without knowing we were here. It was all pretty clear. And so that same morning, they would end up arresting Alan. They would later track down David Fryer, and they arrested him. And then they found out that James Fryer was actually already in jail. And so when they approached him, he was like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I've been in jail, because he was in there for like burglary or something. So I couldn't have been involved in this. I wasn't there. I was in jail. But the police quickly learned that, nope, that's not necessarily true, because they found out that James, well, he was also on work release, meaning he was allowed to leave the jail to go to work. And so when they looked into this, he in fact was out of jail the night that the murders took place. So now they knew he could have definitely been there at the murder scene. Eventually, the three of them are kind of questioned individually, and they all start to kind of turn on each other like, no, James did it, or David did it all, or Alan did it all, or, you know, the two of them did it, I didn't do anything. It was just a lot of back and forths. Police weren't getting a straight story. However, they did have a police lineup, and Sandra did identify all three brothers without hesitation, and she said that it was James who was the one to have sexually assaulted her in the pickup truck. And for that, she was absolutely certain. Then they started to give stories like, well, those teenagers, they shot at us first, and so we were just shooting back, like we were defending ourselves. Which was obviously nonsense, because they didn't find any other guns at the crime. They found no guns at the crime scene. They found no guns in the blue van. They found no guns in the pickup truck. They didn't find any additional guns other than the guns that the Fryers already owned themselves. So they knew that was just ridiculous. They asked them, what were you guys doing? Like, why were you at Gitchy Manitou that night? And so eventually one of them says, we were just out deer hunting. We wanted to go out and hunt some deers, not for food and not for sports. They wanted to go out there, hunt deers, literally for the sake of killing something. That's what one of them said. We just like killing animals. Great people. That's when they said they stumbled across the five teenagers. They saw and smelled the marijuana, and they figured maybe they had more drugs. When Roger Essam got up to investigate, that's when he was shot dead, basically right there on the spot. James had shot at Stewart, who injured Stewart originally. Alan was the one who shot Mike Hadra through the hand. After that, that's when Alan took Sandra to the pickup truck and left. Then James and David were left with the remaining three teenagers, and they basically said they lined them up, and David shot and killed Stewart Beatty. James had shot and killed Mike Hadrith, and also shot and killed Dana Beatty. So a pair of brothers was murdered at the same time by another pair of brothers. They then just dragged their bodies to a more, open part of this fields, and they just took off in the blue van. They met Alan at the farmhouse, and that's when James decided to sexually assault the 13-year-old girl, and then they just dropped her off at home. So by June 20th, 1974, all three boys are now basically in lockup at the sheriff's station. This is because they were awaiting their trials. Alan had basically crafted his own wrench out of like wires that he found in his cell, and he managed to unscrew some bolts, and he managed to break out of his cell. He then managed to get some keys. I don't know where any of these sheriff's people were, but he managed to get the keys to get his brother James out with him, and they escaped. So now police are like, we got to protect Sandra at all costs. We got to protect everyone at all costs, because they don't know what's going to happen. But it didn't take long. Less than, a day later, 522 miles away in Gillette, Wyoming, the two escaped brothers were found, and they were reapprehended. By this time, David Fryer had already gone on trial, because his trial was February of 1974. He was found guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Alan went on trial after the whole escape debacle, and then he was found guilty on all charges, and he too was sentenced to life in prison without parole. And then in December of 1974, James Fryer also went on trial. They were all tried separately. He was too found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. And they get to still be brothers together because they were all sentenced to the Iowa State Penitentiary. And that's where they all serve their sentences together. So at least they get to hang out still, right? And for what? There really wasn't truly a motive. It was just they ran into these teenagers and they just felt like killing something. It could have been because they thought they had more drugs. That could just be one of the many reasons. These were troublesome kids who just liked getting into trouble together. I think if this is just a case of they wanted to assert power over a group of kids, and they did it. They thought they would get away with it, but they left a witness, which was really stupid of them to do, but thankfully they did. Sandra Chesky, to many people, is really kind of a hero for enduring what she endured, surviving what she went through, and then having the courage to finally go to police so quickly, actually, after she was threatened multiple times, like, if you say anything, we're going to murder you. But she went anyway. And because of her, because of everything she did to help police, they caught these 3 monsters. And so she should absolutely be commended for everything she did. I just wish that her 4 friends were still alive to be there with her. They were all just victims of wrong place, wrong time. And those are usually just the most sad of these types of stories. They were just wanting to have fun, hang out, smoke a joint, play guitar. They were good kids, all of them. None of them deserved what they got, but thankfully their killers were caught quickly, and now they can all rest in peace. They had a pretty good idea who done it, but unfortunately it took about a decade to get them. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Kathy Odom. Viewer discretion is advised. This case takes us to Houston, Texas. Yeehaw. No. That is where 28-year-old Kathy Odom lived with her husband and 2 kids. She was born Catherine Martin on October 25th, 1959. And unfortunately, I don't really have much information on Kathy as a person. Her husband, who was named Michael, was the co-owner of an electrical company out there in Houston, Texas. They had a 4-year-old daughter named Tasha, and they had a 2-month-old son named Michael. Kathy Odom also had a sister. Her name was Shelley, I believe, and Shelley was married to a man named Gregory Marquardt. It was March 3rd, 1987. Michael had gone to work that morning, and then he had called the house to speak to Kathy to let her know that he was actually going to be home pretty late that night. Well, I should say he had tried to call the house to speak to Kathy, but she did not answer. And this apparently kind of concerned Michael, so he actually called a neighbor and asked if that neighbor would come and check on Kathy next door. And the neighbor apparently does do that. He knocks on the door, but not getting any response. The neighbor, who I guess knew the Odom family relatively well, thought this was very strange. And Kathy's typically a very friendly, outgoing person. She knew the neighbors, and if she saw someone she recognized, she would probably open the door for them. But the neighbor just something felt off about the situation, and so he contacts police to say, I think something might be wrong inside this house, just as a gut instinct. So police arrive, and I think it was the front door or side door, I'm not 100% sure, but one of the doors to the home that was used as a normal entryway was unlocked, but not open. That was very suspicious because they would later find out that Kathy, whenever she was home, locked all the doors. They were always locked. And so to have one of the doors unlocked, the rest of them locked, told police that she probably opened the door for someone she knew and let them in. At any rate, they do gain entry to the house, and they do a sweep of the home. Nothing appears to be out of the ordinary. The house wasn't ransacked, but what they found was Kathy Odom. She was covered in blood, and she was on the ground with her hands bound with an electrical cord. And Catherine Odom was dead. Later determined that she had been stabbed many, many times, primarily her abdomen and lower chest area. It was a very savage attack. Brutal. They find also her 4-year-old daughter Tasha was on the couch, unresponsive. They immediately kind of panicked, oh my God, this child is dead as well. But when rescue arrived, they determined that Tasha was actually, thankfully, still alive. However, she had some bruising on her head, and it looked as if she had been struck over the head with either a fist or some kind of instrument a couple of times at least that rendered her unconscious. Then they check upstairs because at this point they hear a baby crying, which is good news because the baby is alive. They do confirm that there is a baby sitting in a little bouncy seat, I think, crying, but otherwise unharmed. However, both children would be rushed to the hospital, and eventually they both were released. Tasha was in there for a little bit longer of a time just because of the severity of her injuries. At first, Tasha couldn't really provide much information, and obviously the baby wasn't going to be able to provide any info at all. They would determine at the coroner's office that Kathy Odom had been stabbed 19 times, and she was also sexually assaulted. This was a very personal, very close contact type crime. They determined that nothing was stolen from the home, no money was taken, no jewelry, nothing. The house, which, looked like a house with 2 kids in it, kind of messy, right? But nothing was out of the ordinary beyond that. Now, Michael, her husband, didn't even find out that anything had happened until he got home that night. Because he got home after his little night out and there was cop cars and everything everywhere. That's how he found out that his wife was dead. Kathy's parents were contacted about the 2 children being in the hospital, but they weren't told about Kathy's murder at that point. They had just been looking on the TV and they saw a news station talking about this murder, and then Kathy's name popped up. That's how her parents found out that she had been murdered. When he got there, he, looked like a normal distraught husband. Nothing really jumped out to police of like him faking anything. He did seem very shocked. They also noticed that on the clothes he was wearing, he had a couple very suspicious, darker kind of stains. Possibly they ask if they can collect his clothing. He willingly provides them. And they test the stains on his shirt. It's not blood. It's actually just paint from his job. They also can confirm that he was at work and then he was at a different location after work. They confirm his alibi that he was definitely there and not in the home. Not during when the time Kathy was killed. Another suspect came up on their radar was actually the neighbor who was called by Michael and the neighbor who checked on the house who called 911. So they, just doing their due diligence, the police, they would get permission to search the neighbor's car. They found these brownish, like rust-colored stains kind of on the carpeting of the floor of the vehicle, plus on one of the car mats. They go and they test that for blood, and it does not come back to anything to do with this case. It's not Kathy's blood or anything. And police were able to rule out the neighbor as well. One of the very first prominent suspects in this case was actually very close to the family, a man named Gregory Marquardt. So if you remember me saying earlier, he is the husband of Kathy's sister. Gregory, who I guess went by Greg, was kind of a thorn in the side of Kathy and Michael. He had this unsettling, creepy obsession with Kathy, despite being married to her sister. He literally made several sexual advances towards her, very inappropriate advances towards her, considering she's happily married with 2 kids. He's allegedly happily married to Kathy's sister, but, it's doesn't mean he killed her. Now, their daughter, Tasha, in the hospital, while she's there, I think it was her grandma, Kathy's mom, was there in the room with her when all of a sudden Greg walks into the hospital room with some flowers. Greg says, goes in there to check on Tasha, see how she's doing, and she immediately kind of goes white in the face. Everything, her smile goes away once he enters that room. It was when her grandma saw this and was like, what was that about? It appeared that Tasha was very afraid of this man. And I think eventually she would describe the guy having like this sort of kind of shaggy type hair, which matched her uncle's hair at the time the case occurred. But they need to piece everything together still. So they know that Kathy was last known to be officially alive around 11:30 in the morning on the day she was eventually killed. She had gone down the street or walked to a friend or a neighbor's house, and she spoke to them briefly. And then she had gotten home within a short period after that, and she spoke to a family member or friend on the phone. And then after that, they don't really know what her movements were exactly. They believe the crime happened probably midday, sometime in the afternoon. They couldn't pinpoint the exact time frame, though. They do think she was likely at least attacked before 5 p.m. though, because like clockwork, every single day when her husband Michael was at work, she would always page his beeper. Yes, beepers, if you remember those. It was like just a routine they had. But on this particular day at 5 p.m., no such thing ever happened. She did not call his beeper. Was it something that immediately jumped out to him going, oh my God, something's happened to her, she's probably dead? No, of course not. Things happen, right? Maybe she got really wrapped up with the kids doing something. But the fact that on this particular day, she did not do that, it told police that she was probably killed and kind of working with the coroner sometime 3:30 p.m. or so. And then in terms of evidence they had at the house, they would dust everything they could for fingerprints. They looked to see and confirmed with Michael to see if anything was stolen. Like I said earlier, nothing was. They did find palm prints. They found fingerprints. A lot. There was a lot of prints in this house. As a matter of fact, Greg Marquardt's prints were also found in the house. However, there really wasn't much they could do with that because he's family. He's married to Kathy's sister. Her sister and Greg would go over to their house literally all the time. He was in there touching things. And so they couldn't say, okay, because his fingerprints are here, we know he killed this, woman. They couldn't. It was not possible to pinpoint that on him based on those fingerprints. Police did say they had other pieces of evidence that they had collected, but weren't really revealing much information beyond that. They also looked into the fact that this could have been a serial killer because not too soon, around the same time, a 23-year-old woman named Michelle Shadbolt had been found stabbed to death in her home. And that happened back on February 14th. So they thought maybe these are connected, but I think eventually they were able to determine that they did not match, that they were not a connected crime. When they interviewed neighbors to the Odoms, they said, we saw nothing, we heard nothing. We didn't hear any screaming, we didn't hear any fighting or altercations, we didn't hear anything smashing around, nothing. And again, that told police that whoever did this knew Kathy enough to, first of all, her to unlock the door to let inside the house, but to also not initially put up a fight or scream anything because maybe she was subdued after she let this person into the house. And then Tasha, who was probably in the room when that happened, well, she was struck multiple times. And police believe that was done for two reasons. One, to get Kathy to cooperate with him and do what he says, or else he'll hurt the little girl. He also may have tried to hit the little girl and he probably thought he killed her so that she wouldn't be able to identify him. But what he did not realize is that that was not the case. She lived. And they just kept going back to Greg Marquardt, the brother-in-law. He had this history of making sexual advances towards her. He made Kathy very uncomfortable on a number of occasions. He did have problems with the law. He and his wife did, Kathy's sister. There was a little bit of violence in his past. Kathy was not scared of him because, again, she would let him in the house, but just like she didn't like being around him kind of if it's just him and her. And then they eventually have that moment in the hospital where little Tasha really kind of just shuts down when her uncle walks in with flowers. And, her grandma noticed a fear on Tasha's face. And so she told all of that to police. And it really did feel like he was the guy. As a matter of fact, police were extremely confident that he was the guy. But they had no physical evidence at that point to connect it to anyone. The fingerprints were useless. If they found any strands of hair or DNA in the home that maybe matched, let's say Greg, again, it wouldn't have mattered because he is there all the time. They need something to pin the murder on him. They need evidence from her or something on her that would indicate another person like her killer. And unfortunately, it took about 11 to 12 years or so for them to finally get that information. So what they do is they have a cold case team looking at this around 1999 or so, and they take all the evidence that they still had, including the cord, because her wrists were bound behind her back with a phone cord that they can tell was cut from the phone in the house. And there was blood on the cord, which was Kathy's blood. But when they swabbed it, now in 1999, they were able to create a separate profile. There was two profiles on that cord. One was Kathy's from her blood and her own skin cells. and then the skin cell DNA of a male that does not match her husband, that did not match the neighbor, because they had retested all of that. It didn't match any men in her life, except for one. The DNA found on the cord, which was directly used in her murder, skin cells that were found essentially on top of her own blood, that would tell them, this is the person, we got him, because his DNA is on this cord that was used to tie her up. And it was a match to Gregory Marquardt, the guy they knew the entire time did this, but had no way of physically connecting him to it. And eventually it does sound like Tasha, who is petrified of this man, is able to identify him as the one who did this. He was arrested and charged with her murder, and he said that he did it. He confessed. Once they had that DNA, he knew his time was up. It was over. They got him. He claimed he was high on several drugs, including heroin, when he went to her home and knocked on the door. She let him in. Again, no forced entry. And one thing led to another, where he injured her and then incapacitated her, tied her up. He raped her, and then he stabbed her 19 times, central around her, primarily her stomach and lower chest, which would show people this was a crime of passion. Someone that knew her. And, he admits to punching little 4-year-old Tasha multiple times until she fell unconscious. And I believe he said he went to the hospital that one time to see if she was saying anything. So, Greg Marquardt pleads guilty to the murder of his sister-in-law, Kathy Odom. At the age of about 52 or so, he is sentenced to 45 years in prison, which means he basically would never get out of prison alive, really. And that would become more true because, so he was convicted in 2004, and on June 29th, 2008, Gregory Marquardt died from liver cancer in prison. And I would never say this about anyone else who's battling liver cancer, but for him personally, I hope it was excruciating. He got away with it for 11 years, and then he's only in prison for 4. He took the life of a woman who was, almost 30 years old. He took a mother away from 2 kids. He took a wife away from a husband. I don't know how close the sister was with Kathy, or I don't know what that dynamic was like, but regardless, he took away her sister. He took away someone's daughter. And now their lives are forever changed, forever altered, because they don't have her in their life anymore. 2 kids growing up without a mom is, obviously I can't say that for myself. My mom is still here. But I don't know, I can't imagine, especially for Tasha, who was 4, and who was aware of what was happening, was aware of what happened, and not to mention she was a part of the assault, that probably has affected her for the rest of her life. I imagine she has trust issues, but, in the end, Tasha and Kathy, they got justice, and I would say they got the justice they deserved. Unfortunately, her attacker and her mom's killer didn't really have to be punished for that long. And so in a way, he kind of got away with it. But we can say at least that Tasha and Kathy Odom's monster could not hurt anyone ever again. But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe to the channel if you are new here. Hello, my name is Mike. I tell multiple true crime stories here on YouTube, obviously. So please subscribe, hit the bell so you're notified when I post new videos. Please leave a like and a comment below because it helps more people see the video. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. The link to my TikTok is in the link tree, which is in the description of this video below, or you can search Making a True Crimerer, as you see displayed, on my channel here. I do post compilation videos at the beginning of each month of all the TikToks I made the previous month. In that link tree below, you will also find my case list, which is well over 7,100 names now. I choose my cases typically at random, so if there's a case you want me to cover that you don't see on there, email me. My email is listed below, just the name of the case, where it happened and when it happened. I'll add it to that list. And again, like I said, I choose cases at random. But if you are a loved one to a missing person, a murdered person, maybe their case is unsolved, it's a cold case, and you want me to cover that case, let me know in the email that you are a direct loved one, and I can make sure that case gets a higher priority. But that is it for this video, True Crime Rooney. So until the next case, ta-ta for now. God, Jesus, Mike, no.